Vanessa Hartley hated mornings, but today hated her back. The rain had come out of nowhere, her umbrella flipped inside out, and now her almond milk latte was dripping down her coat sleeve after colliding with a man in a hurry outside the cafe. She stared at the packed interior of Brew and Bloom, her favorite corner cafe, now filled with laptop warriors and couples taking up entire tables for two. "Of course," she muttered, hugging her drenched tote bag. As she scanned the room, her eyes landed on the last possible option, a tall man sitting alone at a four-person table by the window, his phone untouched, a black coffee in front of him. He had dark hair, neatly styled, and wore a navy coat over a suit that probably cost more than her rent. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not in a cafe surrounded by mismatched mugs and indie music. Vanessa hesitated, then made a decision. She walked straight toward him. "Hi," she said, forcing a smile. "Would you mind if I sat here?" "There's literally nowhere left." He looked up slowly, his eyes warm but direct. "Be my guest." She set her bag down and slid into the seat across from him, brushing hair away from her damp face. "Thank you." "This rain is unreal. It's ambitious for 8 in the morning," he said, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm Logan Barrett, Vanessa." She pulled out her laptop and tried to ignore the man's presence, but it was impossible. He wasn't just good-looking, he had a calm, powerful energy. His posture was relaxed, but there was something sharp in his gaze, like he noticed everything. She caught him glancing at her screen. "Freelancer?" he asked. "Yeah, copywriting mostly, articles, ad campaigns, some web stuff." She paused. Logan's fingers tapped the side of his coffee cup. "A little of everything." She raised an eyebrow, he smiled. "Consulting, real estate, investment stuff, vague," but she didn't press. She'd met enough slick guys in the city who loved to make themselves sound more important than they were. She wasn't in the mood for posturing. Still, something about him felt different. They sat in silence, the occasional clink of mugs and whir of espresso machines filling the gap. Vanessa tried to focus, but her eyes kept drifting toward him. He wasn't typing, wasn't reading, wasn't scrolling. Just sitting back, sipping his coffee like he had nowhere to be. "You always take up 4 seats just to drink black coffee and look mysterious?" she asked before she could stop herself. Logan laughed, deep and genuine. "Only when I'm hoping someone interesting will sit down." Vanessa's cheeks flushed. She looked away, but a smile tugged at her lips. "Well then, lucky you." They didn't exchange numbers, no flirtatious goodbye. She packed up her things at 9 and nodded. "Thanks again for the seat." "Any time," he said, eyes locked on hers. She didn't expect to see him again. But the next morning, he was there, same table, same black coffee, this time with a second cup waiting. "You're early," he said as she approached. "You saved me a seat." "I was hoping you'd come back." Vanessa sat, heart thudding a little faster than it should have. "Well, that's oddly charming." They started meeting every morning. Sometimes they talked about books, sometimes about nothing. He asked questions, real ones, not just the surface-level stuff. He listened like what she said mattered. Still, she didn't know much about him. He never bragged or dropped names. But the way he dressed, the way he casually paid for her drink every day without blinking, the Rolex she noticed when he adjusted his cuff's small signs. One morning, she asked the question that had been circling her brain for a week. "Why are you always here? Don't you have meetings or something?" Logan looked at her for a long moment. "I own the building across the street. My office is on the top floor. I like starting my mornings here instead." Vanessa blinked. "Wait. You're telling me you're sitting in a crowded cafe when you could be drinking espresso in a penthouse office? It's quiet here, and lately I've had better company." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. His tone was sincere, his eyes steady on hers. No games. The next day he wasn't at their table. She waited, checked the door every 5 minutes. 40 minutes passed. Nothing. She left feeling stupid for caring, but 2 days later he was back. She spotted him through the window before she even stepped inside. "Hey," he said, standing as she approached. "I'm sorry." She crossed her arms. "You disappeared." "I had to fly to Chicago last minute. I should have said something. I didn't mean to disappear on you." She sat down slowly. "You flew to another city and back in 2 days." He gave a sheepish smile. Private plane helps. Vanessa's mouth dropped slightly. Of course it does, he leaned forward. I know I've been vague, Vanessa, but I'd like to change that. Would you have dinner with me? She blinked. Like a date. Like a real date. No laptops, no coffee. Just us. She stared at him, her heart pounding. Okay. The next night, he picked her up in a sleek black car with a driver. She wore a simple dress and heels she hadn't put on in over a year. Logan didn't say much when he saw her. He just looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that made sense. Dinner was at her rooftop restaurant that didn't even have a sign outside. The view of the city was breathtaking. The food was surreal. But it wasn't the luxury that got to her, it was the way he looked at her when she talked, the way he reached over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. I've been thinking about you since the first day you sat at my table, he said quietly, as dessert arrived. And the more I get to know you, the more I don't want these mornings to end, her breath caught. Logan, I'm not rushing anything, but I want you to know I'm serious about you. She didn't say anything for a moment, then reached across the table, fingers brushing his. I didn't expect this, she whispered, but I haven't stopped thinking about you either. He smiled, and for the first time, Vanessa let herself fall hard. Vanessa stood in front of a tall wrought iron gate, staring at the discreet plaque that read Valmont Residences. The car that brought her here had already disappeared down the street, leaving her alone with the sound of leaves rustling above the stone courtyard. She felt wildly underdressed in her black jeans and ankle boots, unsure how she'd ended up here after one dinner that felt more like a dream than a date. The gate buzzed and clicked open. Inside, Logan was waiting near a sleek elevator bay, wearing a charcoal button-down and dark slacks. His sleeves were rolled just enough to reveal the hint of a tattoo on his forearm, something she hadn't noticed before. I hope this wasn't too much, he said, watching her take in the marble floor and the curved glass walls. I thought we were going to dinner, she said slowly. We are, he replied, but I thought you might want to see the view first. The elevator opened into his penthouse, and the moment she stepped out, the skyline exploded in front of her floor-to-ceiling windows wrapping around the entire room, the city glittering beyond like 1,000 tiny stars. Vanessa walked toward the glass, drawn in by the sight. This doesn't feel real. It isn't, he said behind her, not most of the time. She turned to find him watching her, his hands in his pockets. There was something quieter in his expression tonight, less polished. I didn't grow up with this, he said before she could respond. I don't come from money. I built my first company in college, failed twice, got lucky the third time. She leaned against the window, surprised he'd offered that up so easily. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want you to think I'm trying to impress you with glass and lights. I'd rather you know the truth. She folded her arms, unsure if she should cross the room or stay where she was. What truth? That I've been chasing success so long I forgot what it feels like to want something for no gain. He stepped closer. Until you. The quiet between them settled like warm smoke. She wasn't ready to call what she felt love, but it was something sharp and impossible to ignore. They ended up at a restaurant tucked into the corner of a quiet street, where the chef greeted Logan by name and the candlelight didn't feel forced. They ate slow, lingering over wine and unfamiliar spices, and when the server cleared the plates, Logan reached for her hand. What scares you? He asked. She blinked. Excuse me, he didn't let go. You said you write for brands. That means you know how to make things sound perfect, but I want to know what's underneath. She hesitated, losing control, not knowing what's coming next. His grip tightened slightly. That's not weakness, that's honesty. She pulled in a breath. What about you, being alone? He said simply. Neither of them spoke after that for a long moment, but the silence didn't feel empty. After dinner, he walked her back to the car, waiting to take her home. The night air was crisp, and she wrapped her coat tighter around her as they reached the curb. He brushed her cheek with his thumb, then leaned close, his voice low. I don't want to rush this, but I also don't want to pretend I'm not already in deeper than I planned. Vanessa's heart flipped. I don't do casual. I wasn't offering that, he said. She looked up at him, searching for any trace of pretense. There was none. The car door opened behind her, but she didn't move to get in. Why me? Because you don't need me. His gaze didn't waver. And I've never wanted someone more because of that. The car pulled away minutes later, and Vanessa sat in the back seat with her fingers pressed to her lips, her thoughts roaring louder than the city around her. The next week passed in a blur of stolen lunch breaks, late-night phone calls that stretched into dawn, and one spontaneous visit to a gallery that left them standing in front of a single painting for nearly an hour. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give, but his presence, steady and intentional, made it harder to remember what her life looked like before him. One afternoon, she arrived at Brew and Bloom to find the table empty. Instead of leaving, she ordered a drink and waited. 10 minutes later, Logan walked in, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. His tie was loose and his brow was creased with something close to frustration. "Sorry," he said, dropping into the seat across from her. "Meeting ran over." She slid his coffee toward him. "You okay?" He rubbed his jaw, then forced a smile. "Just business. Something I've been working on for months is falling apart." "What is it?" "A project overseas. A foundation I started is trying to build housing in Southeast Asia. Local officials are dragging their feet on permits." She blinked. "You have a foundation?" "I don't advertise it. It's just something that matters." Vanessa leaned back, studying him. "You could be anywhere right now." "Why here?" "Because losing a deal doesn't sting as much when I'm looking at you." Her stomach twisted in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. Later that night, she found herself unable to sleep. She stepped out onto her fire escape, the city lights soft and far away, and thought about the man who'd somehow rewritten her mornings, her evenings, her everything. She didn't know where this was going, but she knew she wanted to find out. The next morning, Logan wasn't at the cafe. Instead, a barista handed her a folded note with her usual drink in his handwriting. "Meet me at the corner of 7th and Lark tonight. Dress for something unforgettable." Her pulse kicked. She didn't know what waited for her there, but something told her life would never be the same after this. The corner of 7th and Lark was unusually quiet for a Thursday evening. Vanessa stood beneath the gold-lit awning of an old theater that had been closed for years, her coat drawn tight around her waist and the air cold enough to sting. She glanced up at the marquee where the letters had been rearranged to spell Private Event V. Her heart thudded once, then again louder. The doors creaked open, and a tall man dressed in black stepped aside without a word, gesturing her in. The lobby was dimly lit with chandeliers that looked like they hadn't seen electricity in decades, but the floor gleamed like it had been hand-buffed that very morning. The scent of jasmine and old velvet filled the air. "Vanessa?" She turned at the sound of Logan's voice behind her, and for a second she forgot how to breathe. He wore a black suit without a tie, the collar of his shirt open just enough to feel intimate. His hair was swept back like he'd run his hands through it a dozen times, and he looked somehow both impossibly elegant and completely undone by her presence. "What is this?" she asked, stepping toward him. "I bought the building last year," he said. "It's still being restored. But I thought tonight it could be just for us." "Why a theater?" "I like the idea of giving you a stage." She blinked. "A stage?" He gestured toward the grand double doors behind him. "Come with me." Inside, the room stretched wide and dark, with only a single spotlight illuminating the center of the stage. A table for two sat beneath it, set with crystal glasses and a bottle of wine already uncorked. Vanessa looked around, stunned. "This is insane." "I know," Logan said. "But I wanted to give you something no one else could." He led her up the steps, his hand warm at her back, and pulled out her chair once they reached the table. A chef emerged silently from the wings and began plating food that looked like it belonged in a Parisian gallery. None of it felt forced or theatrical, just quietly extravagant. "I don't want to talk about money," Vanessa said once the first course was cleared. "I don't care about that." "I know," Logan said. "That's why I wanted to show you this. Not to impress you, but to let you see the parts of my world I don't show anyone." She studied him. "Why me?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Because I feel different when I'm with you, like I can be more than what I've turned myself into." Vanessa laced her fingers together and leaned forward. "What have you turned yourself into?" "A man who only says yes when there's a guarantee of return." Who calculates risk in people the same way he does in property. And then you walked in, soaked and furious, asking for a seat like you were daring me to say no. She laughed quietly. I wasn't exactly charming. You were real. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. I've never done this before, she said, not quite looking at him. Let someone in like this. I'm not asking for all of you tonight, he said. Just the part that wants to stay. She looked at him then, and something in his expression knocked the breath from her chest. Not because he looked perfect, but because he looked like he was trying. After dessert, he offered his hand. Dance with me. There's no music. There doesn't need to be. She let him pull her close, his hand resting gently on her lower back. They moved slowly, the silence broken only by the sound of their feet gliding across the stage. Vanessa closed her eyes and let herself lean into him, her head resting against his chest. I don't think I'm ready to call this love, she whispered. I don't need you to. He pressed his lips to her hair. I'm willing to wait for the word. As long as you keep showing up. She pulled back just enough to look at him. And you, how do you know this isn't just infatuation? I've had infatuations. They don't make me want to change who I am. When he walked her to the car that night, neither of them said goodbye. There was no need. Something had shifted, some invisible thread pulled tighter between them. The next few days were quieter. They didn't meet at the café. He had meetings in London, and she sank into her work with a focus that surprised her. But when Thursday rolled around again, she received an envelope delivered to her apartment by hand. Inside, a single ticket to a gallery opening, no note, no name. Just an address. She wore a navy jumpsuit she'd bought on a whim months ago and never had a reason to wear. When she arrived, the gallery was already buzzing. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and the walls were lined with canvases that pulsed with color and emotion. But it wasn't until she stepped into the second room that she saw it. A painting large, abstract, but unmistakably hers. It was the same colors she wore the night of the theater. The same quiet energy she felt on that stage. At the bottom corner of the canvas, a small plaque read, V. The beginning. She turned and found Logan standing near the far wall, watching her. You painted this? She asked, stunned. No, I commissioned it, he said. From a woman whose work I've followed for years. Why? Because I wanted you to see yourself the way I see you, centered, powerful, unforgettable. She blinked rapidly, trying to find air. This is too much. Then tell me to stop. I don't want you to. He stepped closer. Then let me keep surprising you. She reached for his hand. Just promise they won't all be this dramatic, he grinned. No promises, but next time I'll bring music. She laughed, really laughed, and for the first time she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like she was landing. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the collar of her coat outside the glass doors of the event hall. The invitation had arrived, that morning, hand delivered again, only this time it wasn't to a private unveiling or candlelit dinner. It was a charity gala. Black tie. For the Valmont Foundation, the organization Logan had mentioned only once in passing, the one she hadn't asked about again. Now she was walking into its largest annual benefit, and her name had been placed at the VIP check-in without explanation. The woman at the entrance gave her a nod and gestured toward the curved staircase leading to the upper level. Mr. Barrett will meet you upstairs. Vanessa blinked. He's already here? Yes, the woman said. He's the keynote speaker tonight. She followed the curve of the stairs, heels clicking softly against the marble, and found herself stepping into a room filled with people dressed in tailored tuxedos and sweeping gowns, the air thick with perfume and money. A string quartet played near the balcony, and waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays held effortlessly aloft. Logan stood near the edge of the balcony, deep in conversation with two older gentlemen in navy suits. He wore a midnight black tuxedo, the bow tie slightly loosened, his expression focused but unreadable. She didn't interrupt. She stood across the room, watching as he nodded, gestured once toward the stage below, then caught her eye. He excused himself immediately. You came, he said, reaching her in 3 long strides. Well, she said, lifting an eyebrow, you did send me an engraved invitation. His lips twitched. Can't say I've ever done that before. I figured. He stepped aside to let her take in the room. This is the only time of year I let myself be the center of attention. You don't seem to enjoy it. I don't, but the work we do, the homes we build, the clinics we fund, it doesn't happen without nights like these. She turned to him, her voice quieter. You've never talked about all of this. Because I didn't want to lead with it. I needed you to see me before all this noise. I did, she said. I still do, he exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. That's why I asked you to come tonight. I wanted you to see this part too. Not for the spectacle, for the truth behind all of it. Before she could respond, a woman in a shimmering silver gown approached. They're ready for you, Mr. Barrett. Logan touched Vanessa's hand. Don't disappear. He stepped away and descended the stairs to the main stage. The room dimmed slightly, the quartet fading out, and a single spotlight cut across the hall. Vanessa watched as Logan took the podium. Not the polished version of him she'd expected, but something quieter. Honest. He spoke not about investments or strategies, but about a boy who grew up fixing broken things: bicycles, shelves, loose floorboards in a house that never quite held together. How he'd grown into a man who wanted to fix bigger things. How the foundation wasn't about charity, but about dignity. His words weren't grand, but they were real. And every person in that gilded room listened like it mattered. After the speech, guests returned to their wine and laughter, but Vanessa stayed near the balcony, her heart full and unsteady. Logan found her again, a touch of pink in his cheeks now. That was more terrifying than I let on. She reached for his hand. You were extraordinary. He looked at her like he wanted to say something more, but a man in a tuxedo interrupted, asking for a word. Logan nodded politely, but his eyes stayed on her. 5 minutes, he said. Then I'm stealing you. She nodded, and he moved away. Vanessa wandered toward the far end of the balcony, where a wall of glass overlooked the garden below. She stood quietly, absorbing the weight of everything she'd just seen, who Logan was when no one was watching. And who he chose to be when everyone was. She didn't hear him come up behind her. There's something I want to ask you, he said. She turned. You already gave a speech. I think your night of vulnerability is complete. He didn't smile. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Vanessa's heart stuttered. Logan. He opened it, not to reveal a ring, but a single vintage key. I bought a place, he said. Not a penthouse, not glass and steel, a small brownstone in Brooklyn. Needs work. The layout's a mess, but it has a fireplace that actually works and light in the kitchen in the morning. She stared at the key, her pulse roaring in her ears. I'm not asking you to move in, he said quickly. Not unless you're ready. But I want you to know I'm building a life that fits you, not the other way around. She looked up at him, eyes stinging. You're not who I expected, she whispered. Neither are you. She took the key and closed her hand around it. Later that night, he walked her to a waiting car, but neither of them wanted the evening to end. Come home with me, she said softly. No linen tablecloths, just leftovers and wine and maybe a broken radiator. He laughed, the sound low and warm. Sounds perfect. They fell asleep on her couch, limbs tangled, pizza box still open on the coffee table. Weeks passed. Then months. Logan's meetings became fewer, her mornings became brighter. They still visited Brew and Bloom, but now they sat side by side, legs brushing, hands linked beneath the table. One spring morning, she arrived to find the usual crowd and a new addition, a small wooden sign above their corner table that read, "Reserved for V." She turned to him, eyes wide. It's yours, he said. It always was. She shook her head, laughing. You're impossible, he kissed her temple. You love me anyway, and she did, fully, unquestionably, with a depth she'd never thought herself capable of. Logan never asked her to change. He simply gave her a world she could fit into without leaving herself behind. And in return, she gave him the one thing he'd never been able to buy, the peace of being truly seen. They didn't need promises made in gold or ceremonies broadcast to hundreds. They had a café table, 2 mismatched mugs, and a love that had grown without warning but rooted itself so deeply, it could never be shaken. Vanessa Hartley had joined a stranger at a café for lack of space, and found a home in a man who'd made room for her in every part of his world. Vanessa adjusted the old paint-splattered sweatshirt knotted around her waist and stepped back to inspect the exposed brick wall in the kitchen. Dust clung to her arms, and the scent of fresh plaster filled the air. The brownstone was slowly transforming each uneven floorboard, each crooked cabinet door a piece of the chaos they were learning to love together. Logan appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled, a streak of white paint across his cheek. "I think I broke the sink," he said, holding up a wrench with an expression that hovered somewhere between amused and horrified. She crossed the room and leaned against the counter beside him. "How does a man who manages international development projects lose a fight to plumbing?" "I delegated the wrong task," he said, placing the wrench on the counter. "Clearly, I should have stuck to sanding." "You mean the wall you accidentally drilled through last night? I was testing structural integrity." She laughed and kissed the tip of his nose. "You were trying to hang a spice rack." They stood there in the silence that only came from comfort, the kind that didn't need to be filled. He rested his forehead against hers. "I was thinking," he said, voice low, "maybe we stop calling this place a project." She pulled back slightly. "What would you call it instead? A beginning?" She tilted her head, curious. "You already said that once, at the gallery." "I know, but back then I thought the beginning was us finding each other. Turns out it's what we're building after." Her eyes softened. "That sounds dangerously close to poetic. I've been spending too much time around a writer." She ran her fingers along the edge of the counter. "We've been working non-stop. When was the last time we stepped outside this place and breathed?" He leaned one hip against the counter. "I was going to surprise you this weekend, actually." Her brows lifted. "Surprise me with what?" He pulled a folded envelope from his back pocket. "A key to a cabin in Vermont, no contractors, no cell service, just a fireplace, books, and a lake." She unfolded it carefully, reading the address. "You're serious?" "I haven't been this serious since I asked if you liked oat milk," she grinned. "And I ignored you for 2 weeks after that." "Exactly. So I figured I'd go bigger." They left at sunrise 2 days later, the brownstone still half-painted, the sink still leaking, and the spice rack still on the floor. The drive was long and winding, the road surrounded by trees bursting with early autumn. Vanessa leaned against the window, watching the leaves shift between gold and rust. When they arrived, the cabin was tucked between 2 hills, a trail of smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, it smelled like cedar and old books. Logan dropped their bags near the front door and pulled her into his arms before she could even take her coat off. "Welcome to nowhere," he murmured against her hair. They spent the first evening cooking pasta over a flickering stove, the wind howling outside. She read to him from a poetry collection she found on the shelf, pausing every few pages when he interrupted her with kisses that left her breathless and laughing. Later, wrapped in a blanket in front of the fire, he pulled something small from his pocket. It wasn't a ring. It was a worn photograph, creased at the edges. A boy standing next to a rusted bicycle, grinning at the camera, his shirt 2 sizes too big. "My mother took this the day I fixed that bike," he said. "It was the first time I ever made something broken work again." Her gaze lingered on the photo. "You kept it all this time?" It reminded me that I could always start over, no matter how far off course I went. Vanessa leaned her head on his shoulder. "Have you found what you were looking for?" He turned toward her, his voice quiet but certain. "I didn't find it. You're the one who gave it to me." They stayed until Sunday afternoon, the lake still and glassy when they said goodbye. On the drive back, she rested her hand on his knee, watching the road blur past, knowing that the version of herself who walked into that cafe months ago wouldn't recognize the woman beside him now. Back in the city, the brownstone welcomed them with its usual imperfections. But something felt different. They weren't fixing it to impress anyone. They were making it theirs. 6 weeks later, Vanessa stood in the middle of their living room, now painted a soft sage. Morning sunlight poured through the windows and landed on the new bookshelf Logan had built crooked but proudly standing. She heard the front door open and close. "In here," she called. Logan walked in holding a paper bag and 2 coffee cups. Brew and Bloom reopened. "I brought the good stuff." She took one and sipped. "I missed this." He set the bag on the counter. They asked about you, said the mornings got boring after we stopped showing up. We'll visit next week, she said. Remind them how noisy we can be. He wrapped an arm around her waist, drew her close. Or we stay in and make our own noise. She laughed and leaned into him. You're getting bold. I'm getting used to having everything I want in the same room. That night, they hosted a small group of friends and colleagues the first time since the move. The space wasn't perfect. The coffee table had one leg shorter than the rest, and the oven timer stuck on 0. But it didn't matter. Laughter echoed off the walls and light spilled from every corner. When the last guest left, Vanessa curled up beside him on the couch, wineglass in hand, toes tucked beneath his leg. You ever think about how strange this all is? She asked. That a seat in a cafe turned into this. He kissed the inside of her wrist. I think about it every time I look at you. They sat there, the city humming softly outside, and for the first time in either of their lives, everything felt easy, no pretense, no chase. Just love, honest and extraordinary. And this time they weren't falling, they were already home.